Hi, everyone. Quick question before we get started. If I told you right now that instead of going to the grocery store, you could get all of your fruits and vegetables for free, would you take me up on that? Okay, great. Moving on, over a quarter of the global population, including over 20% of adults in Seattle and 20% of UW students, struggle with food insecurity. But what is it? Food insecurity is the limited or uncertain availability of nutritious foods and can be accompanied or exacerbated by the presence of food deserts. According to the USDA, food deserts are census tracts where a significant portion of the population is low income and at least 1/2 to 1 mile away from a grocery store in urban areas and 10 to 20 miles in rural areas. Except, here's the problem with food deserts. They make people think they occur naturally, making you picture a desolate landscape akin to an actual desert. They also ignore vast local food systems, and they imply that simply adding a grocery store to these areas will fix the problem. This has led to the rise of the term food apartheid, which refers to the deliberate and systemic inequalities in food access, often rooted in historical injustices such as redlining, segregation, and discriminatory economic policies. Food deserts are much more than areas without grocery stores. They are communities that have been purposely marginalized by the food systems in our country. All of these conclusions led me to a crucial question. Given its local benefits, could urban agriculture be a viable solution to alleviating food insecurity in Seattle's food deserts? To answer these questions, I used a variety of public data resources, a mapping software, and a ton of math to examine where food deserts are located in Seattle, the potential space for urban ag within those food deserts, and the potential yield urban ag could provide food desert residents. Using the USDA Food Research Atlas, I found 18 census tracts in Seattle that fall under the half-mile classification for a food desert, in red here. In purple, you can see food deserts that are qualified as low vehicle access, and there are 2 more that are qualified under the 1-mile classification for a food desert. Next, I had to determine what open space was available for urban agriculture. Using a Seattle Public Space Explorer, I found over 10,000 acres of public space within Seattle, and 891 acres of public open space that could be used for urban ag within food deserts. When conducting my yield calculations, I found that Seattle food deserts could grow between 17 and 22 million pounds of fruits and vegetables, excluding dry beans and peas and citrus fruits. These fruits and vegetables would be grown on 629 to 887 acres of land, or roughly the size of Central Park in New York City. So, what does this all mean? Well, with 891 acres of available space, there's enough space to grow 75% of the fruit and vegetable needs of the 103,000 residents of Seattle's food deserts. Unfortunately, though, it's not that simple. Zoning laws in Seattle are confusing, and currently there are no areas specifically zoned for urban ag, making it tricky to set up. And urban ag programs like this often need a lot of financial support and often don't have long-term viability, so developers will wait in the wings to take over the space when it fails. Also, it is currently unclear whether urban ag really can address food insecurity. As mentioned before, food apartheid is not a one-size-fits-all issue. There is an entire history of injustice and discrimination that is wrapped into US food systems that cannot simply be addressed by urban farming. However, if my internship with City Fruit this summer taught me one thing, it's that people love free produce. After conducting nearly 60 harvests across Seattle's fruit trees and donating that fruit to the public at Fruit for Alls, I know this project, while tricky and expensive, would not go to waste. Urban ag could also be a very strong way to build community through teaching younger generations about land stewardship and emphasizing the importance of knowing how our food is grown and where it comes from. And with 75% of fruit and vegetable needs accounted for, food desert residents could spend 15% less on groceries each trip. Finally, a large urban ag program like this one would create a ton of green space across the city, improving air quality, alleviating the urban heat island effect, and reducing food transportation emissions. So Seattle could look more like this. Now, given those benefits and barriers, what comes next? We need to survey the Seattle food desert community to gauge interest in this project. We need to examine the available spaces for urban ag to determine if farming is truly feasible, and we need to decide what kind of urban ag we would use. Now, in conclusion, urban agriculture is certainly not the end-all be-all solution to food insecurity. However, providing free fruits and vegetables to 103,000 people who have little access to healthy food is no small thing, especially considering it would only take less than 10% of Seattle's public open space to do so. Now, let me ask you one more time. By a show of hands, if I offered you free fruits and vegetables that could help your community, your environment, and lower your grocery bills by 15%, would you take them? Exactly. I'd like to thank all of the people up on the board and thank all of you so much for listening and coming out tonight. Thank you so much. Yes, right here.
You mentioned 75% of food. How did you establish that percentage of number?
Yes, of course. So the question was, how did I establish 75% of fruit and vegetable needs, correct? Wonderful. Okay, so as I mentioned, dry beans and peas and citrus fruits were not included in my calculations. That dry beans and peas account for about 5% of the average American's fruit and vegetable diet, and citrus fruits account for about 20%. So that's where you get that subtracted 25% number. And I decided not to include them in my yield calculations because one, we can't grow citrus fruits in Seattle. You don't see banana trees lying around. And two, dry beans and peas are very low yield, high land requirement crops. So it would take about over 500 acres just to grow the dry beans and peas requirement. So I decided to exclude them.